Hey,
Hey, how's it going?
good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Good to see you this morning.
Likewise.
Have you been riding any?
No, ride my bike.
Yeah,
Nah, it's been too wet.
that's
I might catch some wind later on this afternoon, but it's been too wet and too cold. We were desperate to ride last week,
hmm
and so I don't know if you remember the old Lee's Chicken franchise.
I
Um,
don't think so.
they were everywhere. Then they kind of went away. There's one of these chickens who's still in Jasper, Alabama. So we rode to Jasper to go to Lee's.
Oh, Lee. Yeah. At least I do remember Lee's now that
Yeah,
yeah.
there's only one. Like if you Google it, you only find the one in Jasper.
Was it worth it?
Yeah, it was. They used to. I like chicken livers,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody else has chicken livers anymore. KFC used to sell it, they don't.
Yeah.
But they had some really good chicken
Well, I will take your word for it.
livers. The chicken wasn't bad either. Me and Demetrius, my friend Wendell, we rode up there, but yeah, it was a good. It was cold. God, it was cold.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. That's kind of I was wondering because it has been. I was
Well,
actually wanting to go ahead.
global warming, like people talk about global warming, but like it's a myth that they want to. Like literally, this summer, it was too hot to ride. Like it was too
Yeah,
hot to ride, especially
yeah,
if you're gonna wear protective gear. And now it's almost too cold to ride. Like we don't have any middle ground anymore, and that just can't be good.
yeah. Yeah, when in the summer, even if you're going at a good clip, it's like having a hair dryer blow on you.
Yep, yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and if you're dressing for the slide and not the ride, that's got to be pretty hot.
Yeah, yeah. That is terrible.
Yeah.
It is awful. But hopefully we'll figure this out. What y'all do for Thanksgiving?
We went up to Huntsville a couple of times. Once for my parents and sister, and then another time for Ruth's Angela and Ruth's side of the family. And
Okay.
so we went up twice, but it was good. We had a lot of leftovers. We were eating leftovers yesterday, so it
Yeah,
was
I got a 3 day limit on leftovers.
it was it was good stuff. It was funny because I've been intermittent fasting, and intermittent fasting because I'm not always on it. But I decided to fast in the morning for lunch and dinner, and
Right.
I then it was like the next day I didn't want to eat. I mean, I was still too full, so it was good.
Are you doing it just for health wise? Or you trying to lose weight?
Yeah, health reasons. So I my was A1C was high. It was actually within target range recently, but I just doing it to discipline my whatever liver. Just keep it within its bounds.
Yeah, that's when I first started intermittent fasting. I was like almost at 220 pounds. To keep in mind, I'm 5'6",
mhm.
and like it took about maybe 8 months for me to get down, but it was like a consistent weight loss. So I never felt like I was plateauing.
Yeah,
And my system was to eat big meals every 12 hours,
yeah.
or like every other meal would be a rather healthy meal. So I was explaining this to Miriam the other day. I eat a big breakfast, a snack for lunch, or if anything, just to keep my metabolism going, and then a
hmm
big dinner. The
hmm
next day is like a bowl of cereal, a nice sized lunch, and then maybe a salad.
Right.
But the problem with weight loss is people think that they can starve their way into weight loss, but it actually slows down your metabolism because
hmm
your stomach tells your brain, "Hey, we ain't got no food. Slow this crap down."
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't. I used to, of course, when I was younger and running a lot, I could eat anything I wanted to anytime and not have any problem. Of course, I wasn't measuring my A1C
You
levels.
didn't need to. Yeah,
Didn't
trust
need
me, you
to.
didn't need to at that point.
But
Are you still running?
yeah, no, I've got some plantar fasciitis, so I haven't been running. I've been using the rowing machine more recently.
Okay.
But well, I think Robert Miller going to join us. I didn't see.
If not, these attendees better be prepared to be drafted.
I know, right? Yeah, Paula's out because she's not feeling well.
Yeah, she told me that's terrible.
Yeah. Let's see.
Nothing better than pie for breakfast.
I'm gonna make sure they got the oh, there's Miller. Hey.
Hey there. Rob's
How's
on
it
his way. We're
Okay.
running a little late this morning.
Oh, no worries. No worries. We may be a crew. I think we'll be a crew of 4 today. So
Okay.
So for those of you who are tuning in on Facebook and YouTube, want to welcome you. This is a house church. So and we do this like we would do if we were meeting in someone's living room. It's pretty informal. We have a liturgy, then we have a text, or we have a focus for the day. And then we have some conversation. And so if you're used to church with a lot more pageantry, this is going to look a lot more like a Bible study. I do love the music and I love the pageantry, but this is house church, like we're in somebody's living room. And if any of you would like to participate who are streaming, there is a Zoom link. If you would like to participate on Zoom. Sometimes we do draft people, or we invite people, I should say. We don't conscript anybody. We invite people to take part in the worship because it's part of how we put it together. This isn't something where we're performers watching somebody else. We're actually worshiping together as a team. So I'm gonna go ahead and let's see. I've still got the announcement screen up. So if you are streaming on Facebook or YouTube, I'd love for you to just click like, or if you would like to comment with where you're watching from. That just gives us a way to count you. We appreciate that. It gives us a way to know how many people we're reaching. And welcome to those of you. I see some in the chat. Glad that you're here. Let's see. Today is actually the first Sunday of Advent. On the Christian calendar, Advent's the 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas. There's some rituals that we do a little differently during Advent. If you would like to mark the occasion, some of you might have like an Advent wreath, which is during Advent. If you would like to mark the occasion, pardon me. If you'd like to light a candle or something special, feel free to do that. It's a nice time to prepare and think about what's coming up. I'm going to go ahead and get the liturgy up also here so we can get started. We'll wait for Rob before we get rolling.
Hey, I'm here.
Oh, you are here. Okay. You're going to be a disembodied voice today?
That's me today.
That's fine. That's fine.
I'm going for a kind of seraphim effect.
You need a better picture.
Yeah, you need like
a cloud of eyes and flame. Yeah.
There you go. So yeah, if you don't mind, I'll do the Hebrew Bible reading, and we'll keep the same roles that we typically have. If you don't mind being the voice of the people, Rob.
Sure thing.
And Tony, when you're ready, you'll get it started.
All right. Good morning. On this day in 1095, Pope Urban II declared the First Crusade with the aim of capturing Jerusalem. When Jerusalem fell, the Crusaders massacred the resident Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike. In this and subsequent crusades, an estimated 9 million people were killed. Also on this day in 1825, Swedish chemist Alfred Nobel signed his will, establishing that his fortune and estate would be used for the creation of an award for those who contributed to the benefit of humanity. Nobel, the inventor of dynamite, was especially concerned that his legacy would be one of peace. Today is the feast of St. Virgil of Salzburg, who died in 784. He was twice denounced by colleagues and exonerated by Rome. In the first case, he argued that baptisms were valid even if the priest mispronounced words. It could have been me. In the second, he argued that the world was a sphere and the people might even live on the other side of the planet. Greetings. Today we draw a circle not of exclusion but of inclusion.
Jesus has revealed that God's nature is love.
And the glory of God is a human being fully alive.
We come to be disciples of love and of life.
To learn and to teach, to share the wisdom of our ancestors.
Draw near and let us break together the bread of life.
Psalms 46. I rejoiced with those who said to me, let's go to the Lord's house.
Now our feet are standing in your gates, Jerusalem.
Jerusalem is built like a city, joined together in unity.
That is where the tribes go up, the Lord's tribes.
It is the law for Israel to give thanks there to the Lord's name.
Because the thrones of justice are there, the thrones of the house of David.
Pray that Jerusalem has peace. Let those who love you have rest.
Let there be peace on your walls. Let there be rest on your fortifications.
For the sake of my family and friends, I say, peace be with you, Jerusalem.
For the sake of the Lord our God's house, I will pray for your good.
So our Hebrew Bible reading is from Isaiah 2, 1-5. This is what Isaiah, Amoz's son, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In the days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house will be the highest of the mountains. It will be lifted up above the hills. Peoples will stream to it. Many nations will go and say, come, let's go up to the Lord's mountain, to the house of Jacob's God, so that he may teach us his ways and we may walk in God's paths. Instruction will come from Zion, the Lord's word from Jerusalem. God will judge between the nations and settle disputes of mighty nations. Then they will beat their swords into iron plows and their spears into pruning tools. Nation will not take up sword against nation. They will no longer learn how to make war. Come, house of Jacob, let's walk by the Lord's light.
Matthew 24, 36-44. But nobody knows when that day or hour will come, not the heavenly angels and not the Son. Only the Father knows. As it was in the time of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the human one. In those days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark. They didn't know what was happening until the flood came and swept them all away. The coming of the human one will be like that. At that time, there will be two men in the field. One will be taken and the other left. Two women will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken and the other left. Therefore, stay alert. You don't know what day the Lord is coming. But you understand that if the head of the house knew at what time the thief would come, he would keep alert and wouldn't allow the thief to break into his house. Therefore, you also should be prepared, because the human one will come at a time you don't know. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
Albert Schweitzer wrote, what has been passing for Christianity during these 19th centuries is merely a beginning full of weaknesses and mistakes, not a full-grown Christianity springing from the Spirit of Jesus. Amen.
So thank you all for getting us started with our liturgy today. We'll go into a time of prayer. I'll get us started, and if you are on Facebook or YouTube, if you would like to lift up a prayer concern, something you would like to us to share in prayer, just type it in the comments or the chat, and we will include that in our prayer today. Let's pray together. God, as we move into a time of prayer, we give you thanks for the change of the seasons. We are aware of the passage of time as we celebrate holidays, as we anticipate the coming of Christmas. On this, the first day of Advent, we give you thanks for the chance of new beginnings. Lord, every day is an opportunity to start something new. And yet it's so easy for us to feel like it is one day after another, one grind, one holiday after another. Help us to see the opportunities and the choices available to us. Help us to find reasons for being thankful. Help us to avoid the cynicism and bitterness that comes with assuming that everything is going to go on just as it always has, or that we're all spinning into an uncontrollable and destructive future. We pray, God, instead for a great turning, for a change in our hearts and in the world. And we remember that that's what Christmas and Advent are about, the announcement of a new age, a new opportunity for humanity to get it right. We're very aware, though, God, that there are many things holding us back. We call this stuff many names. Sometimes we call it original sin. Sometimes we call it our own sinful nature. Sometimes we call it human nature. It seems so often the things that we attempt for good go wrong and do damage and destruction. And yet we are always called into a new future and into hope. We lift up to you those places in our lives and in our community where people are struggling, whether that's with poverty or with relationships, with addiction, with trauma. We lift all these things up to you and ask for your healing to create, again, new opportunities for a better future. And I invite those of you who are listening to share your prayer concerns.
For Camille's mom's health, and for all our elders who struggle with the changes in their lives.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the protesters in Iran and China.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Teresa's mama and her granny.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Paula.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the ongoing healing of families who are divided by politics, faith, and misinformation.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the January family.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For transgender children and adults.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Stephanie McDonald and the loss of her mother.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For my friend Tracy and the healing of her son.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For drought-stricken areas worldwide.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those needing discernment to determine the path of most good and least harm.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Debbie Kelly's new grandchild.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the disabled children and their families.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those in need of housing as it gets very cold.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those in difficult relationships.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Praises and gratitude for Cruz, who's home for a week prior to having his bone marrow transplant.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gratitude for friends celebrating their love and anniversaries.
Lord, hear our prayer.
In support of those spiritual but not religious, that they find community.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For parents who are stuck in their ways.
Lord, hear our prayer.
A general prayer for help.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gracious God, for all these things that we've named and those things that remain unnamed, we give you thanks that you hear and that you answer. And we know that when our words fail, that we can always turn to the words that Jesus taught us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial, and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So again, thank you for being with us today in worship. Since this starts this is the beginning of Advent, and because we are anticipating the coming of the Prince of Peace, I wanted to continue something I started a couple of weeks ago, which is to talk about peace. And I mentioned that there's actually a whole field of study called peace studies. And it seems it's one of those things that unless you've heard of it, unless you know about it, it almost feels to me like a duh. Like, obviously, we should be studying peace. That's the whole idea. Isaiah had the scripture in the Hebrew Bible where he's talking about, and you've probably heard the scripture before, nations beating their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. I mean, he's talking about governments, right? States, nations saying, you know what, we're not going to actually invest in our military anymore. We're going to invest in the things that make for peace. I mean, it's interesting because we have war colleges. We have the study of war. People have been studying war, how to effectively kill other people and win in a violent physical conflict for centuries. We call them the martial arts. Now, by the way, I love martial arts. I love, kung fu and karate. I'm not good at it. I've taken karate before. I think it's a wonderful thing, very disciplined, how to move your body, that kind of stuff. But governments, political groups studying warfare, it seems like that's in our face all the time, right? How to effectively beat the other person into submission is one of the things that we study as a discipline, as an art. So why don't we study conflict resolution? Why don't we study peace? Why don't we invest as much time in doing that as we do in investing in how to blow things up, how to kill people more effectively? And that's what Isaiah talks about in this situation, that in the coming age, when God is actually in control, nations would go and learn from God, or would take instruction from Jerusalem on how to create peace, and that nations would start creating peace. Now, I realize it's a little difficult right now to think about that. What would it mean for people to actually invest in creating peace? And this, I have to say, this passage is, from what we know about Jerusalem right now, pretty stunning. The idea that we would go to Jerusalem and learn about peace, one of the hot spots of conflict in the world, right? So that made me get a little bit reflective. I've been to the Holy Land twice, and I wanted to share with you some images today. And part of this is I would like us to begin learning how to visualize peace, how to see peace. I think it's so easy for us to see conflict and see war, but I wanted to actually look at Jerusalem today. So if you give me just a minute, I'm gonna see if I can get this up in the correct way. I'm changing views a little bit here. I've kind of created a visual meditation. That doesn't work. Let's try that again. Here we go. Let's see if this works. Can y'all see that? Okay. So what does it actually mean to study peace? I took this photo in the last time I was in Jerusalem. I'm standing on the Mount of Olives, which is where Jesus was arrested, looking toward Jerusalem. You can kind of make out the Dome of the Rock down here in the bottom left. I just thought this was framed up so well when I looked toward Jerusalem, and I thought this is kind of the feeling I have when I visit Jerusalem, because it's such an amazing place. And by the way, I'm not today going to get into the whole history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'm going to mention a few things. If you want an in-depth story about this, I really recommend Jimmy Carter's book, Peace, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid, I think. But he's talking about the whole history of Israel, Palestine, and where we are today. But today I just want to really focus on the images of peace and violence. And again, this image is the one I decided to start with, just because when I was standing there on the Mount of Olives, looking toward Jerusalem through the razor wire, it really struck me that this is the feeling of being there. There's such beauty, such history, and also this constant problem of violence. And it's not just obvious violence. It's not necessarily people shooting each other. And by the way, please, if you when I'm talking here, don't feel like, oh, I can't visit the Middle East. I can't visit the Holy Land because there's so much violence. I've been there twice during times when people were very afraid. They said, oh, you're going over there, be very careful. Don't get shot, don't get kidnapped. It's much more dangerous here than it is there, okay? So I want you to understand that as I'm talking about this stuff. I don't want this to be a disincentive for anyone to visit. I would encourage you, if you do visit, to consider ethical tourism and what it means to support people who are being oppressed. But this is where I'm going to start. So this is the feeling of Jerusalem. So when I hear pray for the peace of Jerusalem, this image is always stuck in my head, okay, of that this is what we're dealing with. And I think it's important also, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the border wall, to hear what that means. This is a map. The red line is a wall that separates Israel from the West Bank, Palestine. Now, initially, back in 1949, during the armistice, this green line here was established that this would be the boundary between Israel and Palestine. When Israel decided to build a wall, they argued, why should we build the wall on our side? We should build it on their side, on the Palestinian side. And so you'll see how this red wall goes way inside the green line, sometimes reaching far inside, right, to basically annex certain parts of the West Bank. Again, this is sort of like your neighbor building a fence on your yard, and deciding, that, oh, it's still your property, but I'm going to put a fence there. And just to kind of help you understand a little bit more about what's going on, all these blue areas are what's referred to as settlements. People in West Bank and Palestine typically refer to them as colonies. And part of the strategy here, of course, was to make the red line include these colonies. So essentially, this is land that's been annexed. And as you see, it goes far inside the border here. And to help you understand this a little bit more, the olive color is really where people who are Palestinian have freedom of movement. It's a little bit more restricted in these tan areas. And in this clear area, if you were in Jericho and you decided to go to Ramallah, you might have to go through a checkpoint. You probably wouldn't be able to take the same car. You would have to take a car to a checkpoint, get out, go through the checkpoint, get in a taxi, and then take it the rest of the way to your destination. So you could be stopped anywhere in here because you don't have freedom of movement. You can't build houses in this area. So effectively, people in the West Bank really only have access to about 50% of the country that they live in. So I set all this up because I want you to understand the next pictures, the next slides. Here's a travel poster from, I think it's 1960s or 70s on the left, and a modern re-representation of that same travel poster today. Obviously, the wall is the main feature, right? The artist on the right is making a point that if you visit Palestine, this is what you're going to see, not this, right? So I was there twice. I was there in 2007 and then again in 2019. And when we were going from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, I had to take this picture because this is also the wall. And I love the fact that they had a giant banner here that says, "Peace be with you," when nothing about this says peace, right? Or at least I should say, I like this picture because there's two different kinds of peace, right? There's the peace of having guns and having a wall, which, keeps people from hurting you, is the idea. And that's one thing that people might mean when they say peace. But there's nothing about this picture that says peace, right? Because violence is very present in this picture, especially if you know where the wall is built. The wall's not built on my side of the street. It's built on your side of the street, right? This is another banner that was hanging on the wall. It's blurry because you're not actually supposed to have cameras out. And the picture that I took is technically illegal. If you have your camera out, they will, yeah, I know, I'm such a lawbreaker. They'll take it away, right? So, or they'll stop your bus. And anyway, the whole idea is you can't take pictures. Again, is that peace? If you can't document what's going on? I had to record some of the graffiti that was on the wall. This is in Bethlehem. And again, it's a representation of peace on the wall. I love the fact that there's a dove, a peace dove here, and then you've got Jerusalem in drawn here on the wall itself. More wonderful graffiti. I had to get this because of this beautiful Palestine Lives drawing here. Also over here, you see all racists are bastards. You have, I don't know what the Lego person signifies, but amazing graffiti. By the way, anywhere you go where people have built walls, Berlin Wall, the wall in Israel, you can find some amazing street art. I had to document some of that. But that's just the modern representation, right? Everywhere you go in Jerusalem, there's reminders of conflicts past and conflicts present. This is the Eastern Wailing Wall. This is where the temple was built back in Solomon's time. It was destroyed. It was destroyed twice. It was destroyed during the Babylonian captivity and destroyed again by the Romans. This is where Jews gather. You can see them down here to pray at the site of the temple. On the actual Temple Mount, you have the Dome of the Rock. So the top of this area is actually controlled by Muslim authorities, and this area down here is controlled by Israeli authorities. And sometimes conflicts will erupt, and Muslim folks who are gathered here on the top will throw rocks down here at people who are praying, and then the Israeli military will run up here and They're not supposed to be there by the agreements that have been signed, but they will suppress the rock throwers and that kind of stuff. So it's a very holy site. It's also a site of a lot of conflict. And that's the way it is all through Jerusalem. But it's not just here. It's also, if you go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, about once every few years, you'll hear that probably on Easter Sunday or sometimes on Good Friday, the three Christian groups that control the Church of the Holy Sepulchre will get into fistfights over who's on whose turf in the actual place where Jesus was buried, right? So like you hear this on a regular basis, these holy sites, which are also the place of great conflict. And I wanted to share this picture because this is standing in the valley between the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem. I'm looking up, you can just see the very tip of the Dome of the Rock there. But this wall is not, doesn't date from Roman times, doesn't date from ancient Israeli times. This is a Crusader wall. So earlier we read about in around 1000 AD, a little after 1050, something like that. The first crusade was launched. Crusaders came down, surprised themselves by actually succeeding and taking Jerusalem, massacring everybody inside of it, and then controlling the city. And they built this Crusader wall. So we got a modern wall and we got an ancient wall. As I'm talking about the historical violence in Jerusalem, I don't want to leave out that the place is just amazing. It's an amazing place to visit. It's an inspiring place to visit. It connects you with your history. This is actually standing on our hotel. I was looking over the railing, and this is actually called, I think this is called the gate of King David. I can't remember. But this is a main entrance where we would go in and out. And again, Crusader fortification. It doesn't date from actually Solomon's time or David's time, but you can see just the enormous history that's present in the place. You can also looking the other way, I could see the Dome of the Rock. And again, all these modern parts of, solar panels, satellite dishes, water tanks, because occasionally the water is a little iffy. And you can look all the way across over here. Again, is the Mount of Olives. So you've got the modern and the ancient like sandwiched up next to each other. It's an amazing place to visit and experience. This is taking from the other side of the valley, looking over. Again, you see the iconic Dome of the Rock. I need to mention that the Dome of the Rock is not actually it's not actually a place of worship. It's a shrine, but people don't worship there. The Al-Aqsa mosque over here is a place where people actually gather to worship. So Jerusalem is an amazing place. Olive tree in the Garden of Gethsemane, somewhere around where Jesus would have prayed. It probably would have looked a little bit like this. Beautiful place. And I wanted to share one of the things that Jesus says in Matthew when he looks over at Jerusalem and he's agonizing over the city. The people writing this probably were writing it after Jerusalem had already been destroyed. And so Jesus is kind of anticipating that destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And he laments, he says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if only you would study the way of things that make for peace." And he said, "How I've longed to gather you like a mother hen gathers her chicks under her wings." And so I love this mosaic because it's Jesus as a chicken with a halo around his head, gathering the chicks under her wings. Such a powerful image. Okay, so I wanted to share all that with you because Isaiah talks about praying for the peace of Jerusalem and to think about what does it mean to talk about peace, to pray for peace, especially in a place with such a history, where you've got a temple that was destroyed time and time again, where you've got modern conflict, both secular and religious conflict. What does it mean to pray for peace, or to talk about peace, or talk about a coming peace? I introduced a couple of weeks ago a different idea about what it means to talk about peace. A lot of times when people talk about peace, what they really mean is just an absence of violence. People aren't shooting each other. That's a good start, all right? An absence of violence is a good start, but it really doesn't really capture what real peace is, because as Martin Luther King Jr. said, you can have a peace and quiet where people are oppressed but not lifting their voices, right? That's not really peace. That's hidden violence, right? A positive peace is a structural peace. It's when there isn't inequality, when people have access to food and healthcare, all that kind of stuff. Positive peace is the presence of justice, right? And so peace and justice are like two sides of the same coin, or really they're the same thing. We should talk about them as if they're the same thing. Instead of saying peace is just the absence of violence, we need to have a different understanding of peace that's a little bit more robust. The other thing is peace isn't necessarily the absence of conflict. If you think about any good relationship, even the best relationships, there's going to be conflict. If you get married to somebody, you're going to have conflict, right? If you have kids, you're going to have conflict. If you are in love with anybody, there's going to be conflict because you're different people, right? So conflict doesn't mean we don't have peace. Peace just means we have a good way of resolving conflict, or we can manage our conflict in such a way that we still value each other and have good relationships, and it's not harming the other person. So peace is not the absence of conflict, right? We also need to understand that violence isn't just shooting each other and throwing bricks and rocks. There's a lot of slow violence in the world. So you could be poisoning somebody, right? You could be putting something in their water that's slowly killing them, and you never lift a finger against them or attack them, but it's a very peaceful way to do violence to somebody. I'm peaceful in quotes, right? You could do things that reduce somebody's life expectancy, and that's slow violence. And so some of the things that are slow violence are things like poverty, food and water insecurity. So just even not that you're not starving, but you're not able to predict where your next meal is coming from, or you don't have the stability to depend on it, right? A lack of health care can be a form of slow violence, especially if you've got access, if one group of people has access to it and another people doesn't, especially if that's by design, that's slow violence. If people don't have the same opportunities, that's slow violence. If you are polluting somebody's neighborhood, if you're putting a polluting industry in one neighborhood and not another, what you're doing is you're creating environmental destruction. We call that environmental racism oftentimes, right? So that's a form of violence. And climate change is a form of violence. 1/3 of Pakistan was underwater this year. 1/3 was being inundated by a flood. And just a few weeks ago at Egypt, they came to the international community and they were begging the United States and China and other wealthy countries, those who have contributed the most to climate change, to pay for the rehabilitation for loss and damage that the poorer countries are now going to be suffering. So the whole concept of climate change is slow violence, that one group of people has extracted resources and harmed another group of people. So all that's slow violence. So it's harder to picture peace, right? It's easy for us to picture violence. I've just shown you a bunch of photographs of what violence looks like, slow violence. Here's a chart or a map of slow violence. This is life expectancy in the United States. And there are places where people have much lower life expectancy and places where they are higher. You probably can't read this. This is maybe too small on your screen. But places that are dark green have the highest life expectancy. Those are places like San Miguel County, Colorado, which has the highest life expectancy at 98 years. So that's a good place to live. But if you're born in a different zip code, you're going to have a lower life expectancy. So down here in Alabama and some of the deep red places, Mexico life expect is more like a Mexican life expectancy of 75 years. The lowest is actually Oglala Lakota County, South Dakota, lowest at 62.4 years. So that's a greater than 30-year difference, right? So you've got two groups of people. One group lives 30 years longer than the other. What kind of slow violence is at work that is reducing the life expectancy of those people? We know, right? Because the lowest one is the Oglala Lakota County. So Native Americans have some of the lowest life expectancy on this chart. We can also look at it this way. So men, women, black and white. Again, you're looking at sometimes between men and women, there's a 3 or 4 year difference in life expectancy. Some of that's probably biological. It's also the case that a lot of men don't go see the doctor when they should. And then when you look at black and white, there's a larger discrepancy, right? So females typically, women typically live a little longer than men. So thinking about those things also represent a kind of violence. We know that slow violence is racism. All right, so I wanted to share all that with you because I think visualizing what we mean when we talk about peace and violence is important. It's harder to visualize peace. It's harder to find pictures of peace, isn't it? It's so easy to find pictures of things that are not peace, either direct violence or slow violence. But I want to wrap up with the quotation that sent me down this rabbit trail. Then they will beat their swords into iron plows and their spears into pruning tools. Nation will not take up sword against nation. They will no longer learn how to make war. That's such a powerful image. It gets sung in church. We hear it every Christmas. It's probably one of the most famous verses in the Bible. Beating swords and iron plows, spears into pruning tools. And Isaiah is talking, this is 3,000 years ago. Isaiah is talking about peace studies, right? About how to actually make peace in place of war. So I want to bring it back to our conversation and ask, because when I was putting together this series of images, mostly from my own journeys in the Holy Land, mostly centered around Jerusalem, I found that it's so much easier to illustrate conflict than to illustrate peace. So to kick off our discussion about this stuff, I want to ask you, what images come to mind when you think about studying peace? What would that look like? Or if you have any other reflections on what I've shared, feel free to comment or respond to that.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Like, it's hard to conceptualize what peace really looks like.
Mm-hmm.
One, because we don't see it very often. And even in places where we think it is peaceful, there's always some type of the slow violence that's going on. And when you first started, I was talking about just the irony of what the word peace looks like. And we all think at first peace is the absence of violence. So if you have a neighborhood where there's no violence, then people think, oh, this is good, it's a peaceful neighborhood. But then at the same token, what are the underlying causes? And I think that's one of the things that the more conservative, especially Christian religious views, it's like a cognitive dissonance to where if I don't think about the root causes of what the violence is, I also don't have to think about what the remedies or the peaceful remedies would be. Mm-hmm. And like being a Black man living in Birmingham, Alabama, watching, and I don't watch local news. It's very rare that I watch local news because it's just depressing.
Yeah.
But even on Facebook or social media, I hear people talk about how violent the city is, and it's mostly white people. Birmingham's so violent, blah, blah, blah. have you thought about why Birmingham has a violence problem? And have you ever really thought about that you don't really have to worry about it, even if you're in the inner city? Like they don't have to worry about this, but it's because of the poverty. You miss one, education. Like when you stop funding public education, you really destroy people's way out of poverty. Like you can't get any education. And again, the conservatives will say, well, it's just about financing and just, trying to make sure we put our money in the right places. But like, it's like the old, the literacy test for voting. Oh no, it's not that we don't want Black people to vote. We're just going to fund their schools so they can't read. And then we're going to put a reading test up here because we just need a reading test.
Right.
And it's like, violence, maybe. But, it's crazy. It's absolutely insane. But it's hard to think about what peace really look like. And I don't know if we will ever know that. I don't see it happening.
Well, so I want to point out, like you said, it is so much easier. Like if you watch the news is going to be full of obvious violence. But kind of what I heard you allude to is that, if you looked at a map, if you looked at a chart of like Mountain Brook and then Birmingham, and you did a comparison, you can see structural violence. So when you talked about education, actually, I got to share this with you. So like if you look at Woodlawn School, and you look at how many counselors, mental health counselors they have versus how many students they have, and how many students have, it's not IEP, it's a behavioral educational plan, right? A quarter of them have a behavioral educational plan, and they have 2 counselors for 600 students. That's 1 counselor for
300.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Versus if you look at Mountain Brook, they've got 5 counselors and a smaller student body. So, and only about, I think like 10% have an IEP or some kind of behavioral plan. So like that kind of funding, and you look at that kind of stuff, you're like, obviously this is violence, right? But it hides.
Even the failing school system that they have to negatively paint the Birmingham City schools in a negative light.
Yeah.
There ain't no way you should be comparing Parker to Mountain Brook High School.
Right.
No way whatsoever. I tell people I am very competitive. I like to win, but you know who I compete against? Myself. So instead of comparing Birmingham City schools to rich over the mountain schools, compare the schools to where they were last year in their performance. Like, it's not rocket science, but why do we do that? Because white people want to create a negative narrative that somehow or another Black people are all screwed up. Like, you don't fund the schools. Even the way that we fund schools is racist in nature.
Yeah.
Like, you got kids who don't have textbooks against kids who have personal computers and textbooks at home that they can read for pleasure. Like, people don't understand the privilege of reading for pleasure. Like, it is a privilege that a lot of people don't have.
Yeah.
But then you want to compare these kids and say, well, they're failing the school. So, no, you suck. It's not the school, it's you.
Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, I remember, like, sometimes people say the quiet parts out loud. They're the really fancy neighborhood up in Huntsville, Blossomwood. Well, which, by the way, Huntsville also got in trouble for essentially being segregated still. And so they started busing kids. But the way people talk about, oh, they're busing, and like I remember a friend of ours talking about how, well, I don't know, they talked about these Black kids that were getting bussed in as like a source of violence that was like, oh, they're ruffians, and they took their kid out of the fancy school and put them in a private school.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. So, and again, I think it's easy. Like when we start talking about structural violence, or we see this kind of inequity, I think that's the struggle, is what would peace look like if like, I mean, it's hard to imagine what's the alternative to that. What would that actually look like? How can we draw a picture of that or photograph that?
I also think about, like, we have trouble depicting peace even in science fiction. Because, I mean, one of the things that I think of, although it's, there are holes in it, is like Star Trek. Because it's supposed to be like a post-scarcity society. And I mean, they're still at war with the other, but in our society, we could be post-scarcity, but we can't. It's a distribution problem.
Totally right. We could solve world hunger. Like we have billionaires who could fix world hunger like that. Yeah. Robert, you got your hand up.
Yeah, all the imagery from Jerusalem is very striking, and I mean it puts me in mind, especially since it's Advent, right? So there's a Christmas song. It's actually, you remember the song, like Leonard Cohen, right? Hallelujah. A Welsh musical group got permission to actually adapt and translate that and completely change the lyrics. They made it into a Christmas song, and all of the imagery is exactly what you were showing. It's barbed wire around the manger and walls going up and gates being closed and the shadow of a gun over Bethlehem, right? It's an amazing, beautiful song. And to have that as a Christmas song, I really love. Because I think it's exactly what you're talking about, excuse me, today. And I mean, so I want to pick up Camille's comment from the chat here, because I think this is just so on point. Religious folks have always been really good at building walls, both physical and spiritual. Safety of one's individual group has always been the most important goal. In most communities, safety is what equals peace. And barring an understanding of what it really means to create peace for everyone, peace becomes divisive. I mean, your point about, Dave, your point about, peace with justice. I almost think, do we need to give up on the word peace because we've lost it? The narrative about peace is about there not being violence, and thus, well, we'll turn a country into a prison so that we can keep the inmates under control and there won't be violence, and that'll be peace. Like, do we need to give up that word and just start harping on, justice for all? I mean, that's in the Pledge of Allegiance, for crying out loud.
But even that didn't mean Black people, but I digress.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is important because it is, as we approach Christmas, I mean, there is a powerful image in Jesus being born in a manger amidst all this other stuff. Like I think in some ways, even setting the birth of Jesus with the wall present, with the, as you said, the shadow of the gun and the barbed wire all around him. And then you've got the birth of this child. That's a powerful image of peace coming in the midst of all this stuff. And I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out. I think, 2,000 years later, we're still trying to figure out how to understand that image and how that relates to peace. But yeah, Tony, you've got your hand up.
Oh, actually, I want to read a couple comments. Miriam says, in a country that had the atomic bomb dropped on them, they have been living peace within their people for generations now. Even a bunch of kids, multi-age, I've never heard a na in more than a month being there. Universal health care, women are in charge of their bodies. In general, everyone earns a living wage, is a part of the fabric of their culture. They have their problems, but we could learn something from those that we tried to destroy. She's talking about the Japanese at that point. Then Andy says that he saw a TikTok about how Rockefeller intentionally ruined education to get the deliberate results that we had today. There's a lot of good comments here. Victoria says, our family has been discovering violence against disabled Americans and horrified by the deaths linked directly to our states denying services that are federally mandated and federally funded. It literally takes nothing but a state passing it through to those in need. I've had a hard time with our so-called Christian community acting with such evil and violence towards those in the most horrible situations. It's hard to see that this isn't all intentional violence and systematic eugenics. How do those in power sit in church on Sunday? It turns us off to It turns us off from ever returning in person to any church. And makes us tremendously skeptical that Christians even want peace.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. Like literally, the people who claim to be the best Christians do the least amount of the work, and it's just sad that you have people like the people who attend St. Junia who are like, y'all can have that. We don't want that no more. Like we need something different.
Yeah.
You know? But yeah, I
Thank
just
you.
had to look those up.
Yeah.
Oh, can I do a comic book reference real quick?
Please.
So, like in the Injustice DC universe, is long story short, Superman decides he wants to end all violence on Earth. So we talk about peace being the absence of violence. Well, in order to do that, he had to enact violence in order to stop the people. Like you decide you're going to have the Joker consistently doing foolishness and buffoonery and killing people, or do you just kill the Joker to get rid of his foolishness? Like those are the ethical questions that we have to ask that usually always ends us back up in violence. But anyway.
And I think especially so again, because I like comic books, Tony. Oftentimes it's this idea that it falls back onto one person, who's often a white guy, to do this kind of thing, instead of like, what would it look like for a community to try to figure out what peace looks like, which is kind of what I'm pushing at. I mean, I think it falls on those of us who really want to study peace and understand peace to come up with some images, to try to communicate like part of what this alternative vision looks like. But thank you for that. Miller, do you mind reading some of the Zoom comments?
Yeah. Let's see. So we did Miriam's. I was saying that Camille's comment reminded me of churches with their own armed security forces.
Yeah.
Now, Angela says, the image Isaiah gives us of swords to plowshares and spears to pruning hooks tells us that the opposite of violence is care for the earth, growing food, and not the slow violence version of agriculture that overuses tillage and chemical fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides.
I appreciate that, Ange. And I think also, one image that comes to mind are places like urban farms. There's one like Fountain Heights urban farm, or places where people are reclaiming spaces, formerly colonized spaces, to become places of good for all, and it kind of generating this abundance for lots of people. That's one of the strongest images that I see, and that's a very biblical image too. It's the whole idea of this idea that God sends this abundance, and then it's the sharing out of all this abundance that creates peace, instead of the hoarding it for myself so that I can be a bigger deal. Thank you for that, Ange. Well, we're drawn up on 11 o'clock. I just want to ask if anyone else would like to contribute to our discussion about images of peace. What would good images of peace look like?
Well, I like Camille's comment. Peace requires people to address their fears of the other, the fears breeding in areas that have traditionally been seen as safe.
Yeah.
And to that point, a picture of peace would look like countries with open borders, where you don't fear the others coming in to take your stuff, take your job.
Absolutely. I missed a comment from YouTube. Giant Robots Conquer the World said, the negative peace is often a monopoly on violence, Pax Romana, which it is. I mean, and that's often like the state holds the violence so that other people won't be enacting it. I want to point out also, like, peace studies isn't a new thing. One of Immanuel Kant's famous essays, this is from, when was Kant? I've suddenly forgotten. 1600s, 1700s, was called Perpetual Peace. Right, the whole idea was, we have to come up with sort of a balance of power to have perpetual peace. Yeah, he also says, aside from something like Star Trek or the destruction of Gundams at the end of Endless Waltz, I have a hard time imagining a positive peace. Yeah, I think, positive. I think it's just so hard for us to imagine. And I think the challenge for us, this is your homework, all right? the challenge for us is to come up with images of a positive peace. Because I think, they say picture is worth 1,000 words, right? I find it so easy to find pictures of violence, but finding pictures that communicate peace. I know this is like an old hippie thing, bumper stickers that say visualize world peace or world peas, as some variants say. But visualizing it, seeing what does this positive peace look like? Can we find pictures or images that we could share that would help communicate that idea?
I think this image right here that people are seeing with the three of us on the screen, like, is a positive. No, seriously, I think it's a positive image of peace. I mean, like, literally, you have a white man who's in leadership, but also does not have a problem sharing his leadership with a woman and a man of another race. Like, those are positive images of peace that we just kind of don't really think about. I'm serious about that. I think this is a very positive image of peace because it does not happen a whole lot, especially in religious settings.
I hear you. And Miller being non-binary, can we say that also?
Yes, yeah, and me being gay.
And you being gay, right? And so we all have.
When does that happen?
Right. So like we all, and I think, I mean, ideally, that's what ecclesia, the called out community, was supposed to be. Like there's no longer Jew or Greek, slave or free, male or female, but the idea that we could have our own identity in a community that respects those identities and then has its own personality.
Yeah.
Right. It's like this sounds very touchy-feely, but one of my friends, Bill Gandy, who's a pastor who passed away not too long ago, said that the question the question that the church attempts to answer is, who am I in the midst of who we are? And that always, I mean, it sounds very out there, but to me, it lands like a gut punch. Yeah. Who am I amidst who we are? Anyway, well, let's pull the liturgy back up and we'll close out with that. If I can find it. Oh no!
I just want to thank everybody for their participation. Like literally, like we had so many comments, we couldn't even get to all of them, but they are really good comments. Go back to the Facebook page and look at some of them. YouTube. This has been a great service.
Yeah, so I want to say that I'll echo that. Part of what makes house church exciting and enjoyable is the back and forth that we have, because it's a round table. And we set it, and then we all kind of come together and we share like a potluck what we got. So, okay. So if this is kind of a longer prayer, Tony, if you don't mind doing that.
Gotcha. We were enclosed, O eternal Father, within the garden of your bosom. You drew us out of your holy mind like a flower, petaled with our soul's three powers. You gave us memory so that we might be able to hold your blessings and show forth the flower of your glory to your name and the fruit of profit to ourselves. You gave us understanding to understand your truth and your will that wants only that we be made holy, so that we might bear the first flower of glory and then the fruit of virtue. And you gave us your will so that we might be able to love what our understanding has seen and what our memory has held. For this we praise you and thank you. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
So again, thank you to those of you who have been streaming. Thanks for joining us for this house church. I hope you have a good rest of your Sunday. Those of you on the Zoom call, please hang around for just a minute.